In this lecture segment, we are talking about Romanesque sculpture and its functions for medieval worshippers. We'll be talking about a tympanum sculpture and a depiction of the Virgin and Child. When pilgrims came to a pilgrimage church, they expected to visit the relics and perhaps receive the Eucharist, but they also expected to see and be edified by sculpture, and the church took every possible opportunity to teach. We're headed to the town of Autun, which is another pilgrimage destination on the branch of the pilgrimage highway that is not quite shown on this map. The church is the most prominent structure in town and was a desirable location for pilgrims because the cathedral had the relics of Saint-Lazare, believed to have been raised from the dead by Christ and then left the Holy Land and settled in Marseille in France. The church looks pretty Gothic on the exterior, but the interior and the west portal of the church feel Romanesque. Here we are on the west side, looking at the portal or the doorway to the church. We are not going inside the structure, but you can tell in looking at the plan that we are dealing with a pilgrimage church. Barrel-vaulted nave, groin-vaulted side aisles, transept arm, and an apse. Our focus is on the experience a viewer had in approaching this church, especially a pilgrim. We are approaching the portal, which was probably carved between 1120 and 1145, and then a few hundred years later its style fell out of favor and it was covered in plaster, which saved it from being harmed in the French Revolution, as many sculptures on churches were destroyed or injured in that period. In particular, we are looking at the tympanum sculpture on this portal, which is like a lunette, a semicircle above the lintel of the doorway. The term tympanum comes from both a Latin and a Greek root meaning drum, so you can think of it as drum-like. The church took every opportunity it could to teach, and this tympanum was likely intended to be part of that mission, to teach pilgrims about religious doctrine when they visited the church, even if they could not read. In this way, it has a similar purpose to the burnward doors we looked at, works of art at significant religious sites intended to teach worshippers. And like the burnward doors, a visitor would not be alone in deciphering this work of art. Odds are a clergyman would be stationed at the door to explain what the worshipper was seeing and magnify the message of the work of art, and also to help manage the crowd and ensure that everyone was behaving appropriately. Even though we've talked about these works of art as being part of two different cultural periods, they are very close together in age and were definitely part of using art as a Bible for the illiterate during the medieval period. We do associate a name with the sculpture seen inscribed here, Gislebertus, who was probably not the sculptor, these were anonymous craftsmen at this point, but instead was the patron who paid for the work or who helped to bring the relics of St. Lazarus to this location. So what was a viewer supposed to learn from this work of art? We approach the work and see above us a scene of the Last Judgment, which is a pretty intense subject to see punishments and wonder where one is going to end up. In the center of the relief sculpture, we have Christ surrounded by a mandorla, or body halo, which tells us that he is not Christ on earth or Christ as the Good Shepherd, but heavenly Christ. We know it's him because he has a halo with a cross. He's depicted in hierarchic scale, the biggest guy is the most important. His body is unnaturally elongated in a frontal pose. He is an otherworldly Christ, a powerful judge existing in a spiritual realm. On his right hand is heaven, where the saved souls go. On the left is a scene of the weighing of the souls, and hell, where damned souls go. At the bottom in the lintel sculpture are a line of souls waiting to be judged, not sure what their fate will be. The Latin inscription running along part of the lintel says, "May this terror terrify those whom earthly error binds, for the horror of these images here in this manner truly depicts what will be." Clearly a dramatic message that would have been read and interpreted by the clergymen at the portal who helped make sure the mostly illiterate pilgrims got the message. And right here in the lintel are two pilgrims. One has a cross on his pilgrim's bag, meaning that he went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and the other has a shell, meaning that he went on a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. They held bags that originally projected over their shoulders, but those have long since broken. They are awaiting judgment, mirroring the folks who come to this church to visit the shrine of St. Lazarus. They see themselves reflected in the sculpture they are looking at. They see people looking like them, which makes this personal and helps them reflect on their chances for salvation, which would certainly be positively affected by making a pilgrimage or by donating to the church. If we go closer, we can see how the artist used clear visual language to strengthen and clarify the message about questioning one's salvation. In this view of hell, we see beasts tormenting the damned, people writhing in agony, and expressive vignettes of awfulness. It's chaotic and confusing. In the weighing of the souls, the archangel Michael is calmly weighing the souls, while the demons are trying to make the soul heavier to bring that soul to hell. These contorted bodies, you can almost hear the snarls and awfulness coming from the demons. By contrast, the angel is calm and controlled. There is a stillness about this figure, still elongated, but a different tone. My favorite vignette is this scene just below that shows this figure being grabbed by these claw-like hands as an adjacent figure lets out a scream of horror. It's pretty awful. I first saw this figure not in a textbook but on site at the church looking at the portal, and a viewer can totally make out the expression of these figures and grasp their horror looking up to them from below. By contrast, heaven on the right is ordered and peaceful. It looks like a pleasant place. We have structures with round arches like Romanesque, Carolingian, and Autunian architecture. Gone is the chaos and the constant movement of the demons, and instead we have saved souls who are calm and quiet, at peace. They seem still and safe. It is certainly not coincidental that the heaven shown here looks like church construction at this time. When we talked about Egyptian and ancient Near Eastern art, we talked about us versus them and how artists sometimes use two different styles to help a viewer read a scene and to know who is who. That is also happening here, as even though figures in hell and heaven are elongated and stylized, the artist has used movement and expression to show us the figures in hell in comparison to the stillness and quiet of the figures in heaven. The artist uses style to show us that controlled and ordered is good and of God, while out of control and chaotic is bad and not of God. And this is again one of our trends in medieval art that we saw with the tetrarchs and the Bernward doors, that communicating message and meaning are more important than making a work of art look like the natural world. We will gradually see this pivot, but for now in the medieval period, artists want viewers to understand particular messages, best communicated through visual and iconographic tactics. Let's talk about one last Romanesque example that had a different tone than the stern warning we see in the Last Judgment tympanum at Autun. This sculpture was made in a workshop in 12th century France. It's about 31 inches tall and made of 9 pieces of walnut, made of wood, and was likely kept at an altar to be a focus for devotion, and probably also used in processions, like what we saw with the reliquary of Saint-Foy and its use in processions today. It was originally brightly colored, and you can see remnants of that color today. I especially love the patterning on the seat of the cushion. We do not know the name of the person or people who made it. The sculpture follows a particular type and is one of many sculptures that follow that type, that standard. A conservator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, in writing about this sculpture, and one from the same workshop that is also in the Met's collection, you can see them here and here, compared the two works of art to the rough equivalent of a monk making 2 copies of the same text. They are variations on a theme, not exact copies, but incredibly similar. We do not see the individuality of a particular artist in this work. We see the artist trying to make a certain type of sculpture that had a particular role to fill. It's similar to an iconographic type we've seen before in the Byzantine world, the Theotokos, or a depiction of the Virgin Mary with Christ seated on a throne. The body of Mary seated on the bench becomes the throne for Christ, as she is the bearer of Christ, as the vessel for Christ, as we saw here in this surviving icon. In the Romanesque period, we often see this iconography that shows Mary seated on a representation of the throne of Solomon, who was seen as very wise. And Christ embodied divine wisdom, which could come to earth because Mary made a mortal vessel, a body for him. Mary is presented frontally holding not a baby, but a little man on her lap. The figures are symmetrical, stiff, and frozen, covered in patterned drapery that does not behave like real cloth. It's highly stylized. Look at how symmetrically it falls down the back. Both figures are shown with jobs to do in positions that signal their roles, not their personalities. It resembles the Byzantine icon in its frontality and its symmetricality, and in the use of a style that removes it from the natural world, in addition to its iconography. And these works likely served a similar purpose. Both were helpful in intercession. Increasingly in the Catholic Church at this time, Mary was seen as the Queen of Heaven and as an embodiment of the Church. Sculptures like this could help the worshiper in a similar way as the icon, by facilitating communication and passing on prayers to deity through Mary, who at this time was becoming much more prominent theologically. But this work of art had another purpose. In addition to helping worshippers direct their prayers and assisting in intercession, it was also a reliquary. You can see here a little cavity where a small relic could be kept, encased within the sacred vessel of the Virgin. And there's another similar compartment behind the shoulder, giving this one work of art so many dimensions that shed light on religious practice at this time. We see Romanesque works of art helping to teach and edify worshippers and playing a role in helping them achieve salvation.